All right, so below the equipment setup is our operating threshold. I'm going to click on that. So the first one is auto changeover. If I have that enabled, that means the thermostat can choose between heating and cooling. If I disable it, the customer won't see that. They'll just see off, cool, and heat as choices. If I have this on, they get off, cool, heat, and auto. If it does have auto, what's the minimum temperature difference between the heating and cooling that I'm going to enforce? 2 is the default, 6 is the maximum, right? I can't go below 2 either. So there's always got to be at least 2 degrees between heating and cooling. So if my heating is set for 70, my cooling can be no lower than 72. It'll always maintain that 2 degrees up or down. If you want to save more energy, you can increase that, make a wider span. That basically means 6 degrees of nothing happening, no heating or cooling. Or I can make it tighter to make it more comfortable but less energy savings. There's a trade-off there. Compressor configuration is the next choice there, and there's lots of stuff under this one. Cooling differential temperature. So when am I going to actually energize cooling? If I have a set point of 75 degrees, and I got a 0.5 differential, it needs to get to 75.5 before it kicks the cooling on. And then it'll bring it down to 75 and shut it off. 0.5 is a pretty good number. If you want to save a little bit more energy, you can bump it up to 1. I would not go higher than 1. If I were to say, for example, pick 2 or 3, and you had a 75 degree set point, and it had to wait till it got to 78 before it turned cooling on, I would think your homeowner would be unhappy with that. So 0.5 is the default. 1 is my recommended maximum that you would set it for. Cooling fan optimization is the next one. Right? So once a cooling cycle ends, we can continue to run the cooling fan for X amount of minutes after that. Always leave this at 0. There's never a reason you want to change this. After I finish a cooling cycle, I want the fan actually to be off because I want all that moisture on the evaporator to continue to drain off the evaporator and go into the condensate pan and out the drain. I don't want to run the fan and blow the moisture back into the house. I just spent a lot of money to get the moisture out of there. I don't want to put it back in the cooling cycle. The only reason this choice is here is because certain states have programs to incentivize you to do this kind of thing, mainly because those particular states probably don't understand the humidity side of it. So leave this at 0 in all scenarios, unless you're trying to get free money from your state or utility. We don't have that in Illinois, so no worries here. Compressor minimum on time, the default is 5 minutes. That is a good number. I don't think you would need to change that. I certainly would not lower that. Basically, every time I get a cooling call, it has to run for a minimum of 5 minutes. That is good for 2 different reasons. One, it protects the compressor, so we don't have short cycling. Every time that compressor turns on and off, it's an abuse point, right? It's an inductive load. It generates heat. You turn it on, turn it off. It cools down, heats up, cools down, heats up. I don't want to cycle it. I want it to have nice long run times. The other thing is, if I get a longer run time, I actually get better dehumidification. We'll talk about that with you guys in a separate video, but just kind of keep that in mind. 5 is a good number. If your equipment is a little bit too oversized, you may actually want to bump it up to 6 or 7 to get a little bit more runtime out of it. Compressor minimum off time kind of works in conjunction. It's the opposite. So once I decide to shut the compressor off, cooling is satisfied, how many minutes do I have to wait before I put it back on? Once again, 5 is a good number for that. Go back here, scroll down a little bit. Compressor reverse staging. So this is interesting. So this is a 2-stage piece of equipment that I hooked it up to today. So I can turn on stage 1, which is approximately 70% capacity on this unit, or I can go up to stage 2, which is 100% capacity. So as my temperature in my house gets warmer, it'll stage its way up. Now normally it would stay at stage 2 maximum capacity until it met set point, then it would shut off. If I have this reverse staging enabled, it actually can stage back down, which is fairly unusual for a thermostat. So I can stage up and I can stage down. Right? So if I could do that, I can have more time where the system stays running and not shuts off. Longer run cycles equal better dehumidification and lower energy costs. So I would use this feature when possible. Compressor 2, temperature delta. So if I have a 2-stage system like I have today, when does the second stage come on? The default is 3 degrees. So remember before I said half a degree or 1 degree for first stage? So at a 75 set point, at 75.5, stage 1 comes on. Stage 2 won't come on until I get 3 above. To me, that's too much. I'm not willing to wait that long. 2 is the maximum I would set that for, and I possibly would consider 1, but I like 2 quite a bit. If I can get the cooling work done on stage 1 only, that is best for humidity control and for energy. So I'd rather do that, but I can't wait for it to get 3 degrees above. People will complain about that. Compressor 1 maximum runtime. This is left on auto. This is the maximum amount of time to run stage 1 before stage 2 is engaged. So once again, if I want to ensure I get long run cycles on stage 1 like we talked about before, I can come in here and say for X amount of minutes, say 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, no matter what, I don't care what the temperature is, don't kick on stage 2 of cooling. Only run stage 1. So if you want to try to help out with the system here, you can do that. All right, so I'm going to back out of here. That was the cooling config. Heating config is similar, so we don't have to go through it, in the same level of detail. I'll just mention them. Heating differential temperature, 0.5. Once again, don't go above 1. Heating fan optimization. It's a little bit different than the cooling discussion. In cooling, I never want to use this feature. For heating, I do want to use this feature. And generally speaking, about 90 seconds is pretty good. Some furnaces automatically do this already. So if they do, you don't have to use it here. But if you have an older furnace without this, this is where you can add that feature in. What this does is after a heating cycle is over and the gas burner shuts off, I continue to run the fan for, in my case, 90 more seconds. I run the fan, the blower, for 90 seconds, but I shut off the inducer motor, right? So the blower motor and the inducer motor on two sides of the heat exchanger, and they're exchanging energy. If I shut off the one and run the other, whatever residual energy is left in that heat exchanger is mostly going to go the way of the one that's still running the fan, which in this case takes that extra heat in the heat exchanger and puts it into my home, instead of letting more of that heat escape up the flue. So I definitely want to use that. Heating minimum on time works just like the cooling. Once I go into a heating cycle, how long am I going to at least stick into that cycle? Reverse staging works just like the cooling one we talked about. And then stage 2 delta, same way. I'd make that 2 degrees if I was you. And then heating maximum stage, you can leave it on auto. If you want to get a longer run cycle, you can go to 10 minutes. All right, so that works kind of the same way. Down below heating configuration is temperature offset. So I have a sensor in here reading temperature. It's a thermistor. It's pretty accurate. Thermistors tend to not have any drift issues. They tend to not really need to be calibrated. They're either good or they're bad kind of thing. However, some consumers have an old mercury bulb sitting on the kitchen counter and they tell you, oh, my mercury bulb says it's 72 and your thing on the wall says it's 74. Your thing's wrong. You can argue about how accurate your sensor is. It doesn't matter to them. To them, the 74 on your screen feels like 72. So I'm going to come in here and subtract 2 off of my screen. So now mine is basically calibrated to match their device. You can go up or down, -5 up to +5 on here to kind of tweak this thermostat reading in to match whatever the consumer's looking at. So that was temperature offset. Humidity offset works the same way, plus or minus 10%, if I'm trying to calibrate this sensor to match some device that the consumer's concerned with. And the last one, zoning enabled. Normally you wouldn't use this. However, if you put this stat on a zoning system, zoning control panels often have a lot of their own safeties for staging and protection and stuff like that. So instead of going in and manually adjusting all of my safeties in here that we just looked at, I can just go ahead and hit enable and it'll completely ignore any of those and it'll automatically just assume that this thing wants cooling, it asks for it right away, wants heating, asks for it right away, and the zoning board will control the protections. So I'm going to leave that off. All right, last one here, equipment test. So I'm going to go into the test mode, and this is a really cool feature. If I go to the thermostat screen and I raise the set point up or I lower it down and expect it to call for so many stages of heating and cooling, I might not get those because some of these delays may make me wait. The delays I just programmed may make me wait 10, 15, 20 minutes before I get what I thought I was going to get. So for checkout purposes, I don't want to have those delays and I don't want to make that waiting period happen. So this test mode skips all the safeties and all the delays as a one-time thing. So I can come in here and I can manually tell it G, click on, the fan will run right now. Boom. I can tell it, W1, stage 1 of heat will run. I can go test my gas valve pressure. Come in here and hit W2. That stage will run, test my gas pressure, tweak that in. Hit next. Then I can do the same thing with the cooling side. Force stage 1 of cooling on, force stage 2 of cooling on. Just skip all the safeties and just boom, hit it on right away. Obviously, if your equipment has any built-in safeties with it, those delays would still be there. But this takes all the thermostat delays out of the discussion. And I can also test my humidifier and click on, and it'll turn on the relay that energizes my humidifier, and I'll be able to see my valve open, see my fan turn on if it's a fan-powered one, and see some moisture coming down the pad. And then when I hit done, it turns all that stuff back off and goes back to normal.